Hey folks, Steve here. How you doing? And thinking about the handyman? Good morning, everybody. I like that guy. It's a fantastic day today, and it'll be a fantastic day tomorrow. It is Friday, and it is early to mid-October 2024. And finally, the day has come when I am able to actually build a Paulk SMART workbench, called the SMART bench now, out of ultralight plywood today and tomorrow, and it'll take a little bit more time than that because I have to get a couple of things in, but the time is now. All right, check this out. So where did I start? I started in August of this year because his plans for his benches have been updated over the past 4 years since COVID, that he really kind of modified and updated his system and revamped it. You know, he kind of redesigned it. Although it looks the same, it is a different system. So I went ahead and got the plans, and I did that in August. I was traveling across country, moving my daughter out west, and I had a golden opportunity to go to Salt Lake City, where a company called Paradise is, and I was able to buy the ultralight plywood. I believe there may be suppliers dotted around the country for the ultralight because it's not a Paradise product. They buy it and then they resell it. So they are, I guess, a distributor is what you'd call that. It is, it's the one name that I had and the one source that I knew they had it, and they would sell it to me. So that's where I went. So that's where I started. I got the plans, figured out what I needed, and then I made my way eventually to Salt Lake City, and I bought 11 sheets of the ultralight plywood, and I got all 3/4. Then I went and I watched a number of the Ron Paulk build videos for his SMART bench, and I also looked at the SMART station, which used to be called the Total Station, which integrates the table saw, the miter box, router tables, and any other tool that you want to hang off that thing. It integrates all of that to be kind of a one-stop shop for any milling, fabricating, processing that you need to do while woodworking. That's bench number 2 for me. But bench number 1 is to do and actually, this is really cool. I am using my original Paulk SMART bench, which is probably version 2, I think. I integrated, a little bit of version 1 with version 2. I took sawhorses from another version, and so this is really kind of an amalgam of a few different designs that he had. And I then modified it and made it 7 feet long instead of 6. And I'm going to use this bench to make the new bench. It's just cool. It's cool. It's very meta. After watching the videos and printing out the plans, they come to me in PDF as a download, and I was then able to print them out. We have a printer that does the tabloid size, 11 by 17, so I printed them out there. I could have my iPad down here and just have the PDFs up and scroll in or zoom in and check out the plans that way. But I'm old school. I'm paper still. I love the paper. Then yesterday, I went and I bought a 1/2-inch sheet of plywood. I need the 1/2-inch sheet of plywood to make my templates. I verified the 1/2-inch sheet would work with my routers because I'm using router bushings to follow the patterns, because I'll do a lot of patterning to create the parts for the bench. And remembering from the videos, what tools do I want to have? I only need really one straight edge, but I brought a variety of straight edges. I need a 1 and a 2-inch hole saw eventually, so I brought up the kit. With that, I brought the drill. I'm going to eventually sand some things, so I brought my orbital sander and an additional 150 grit sandpaper pad. I have my parallel guide. That's a brand new tool from TSO that I bought that fits my DeWalt track saw track, and so I am very happy to be able to use that today to establish square cuts. Then of course I'll be using my track saw. With my track saw, I brought all 3 tracks up. I'm going to eventually use a router today just to round over all of my pattern parts, because it's just nice to have rounded edges, so that's just a convenience for me. Likewise with sanding my patterns, that's just a convenience. I don't need to do any of that. And I'll need a jigsaw. Beyond that, I'll need a tape measure, and I brought up 3 tape measures, strictly imperial, metric and imperial, and then just all metric, and I will be doing all metric today. And nice to have is going to be hearing protection, and I'll listen to music on those things because that's the pro here with the built-in Bluetooth. And coffee, that's not a want, that is a need for me, and then a pair of glasses. Now we will get a high of 65 today, but right now it's 25 degrees away from that. So it's going to be a bit. All right, well, it is comfortable working out here as long as I keep moving, and so for that I probably should get moving. The templates that I am making today, which are actually found in the plans, the templates that I'm making out of this 1/2-inch sheet of plywood are for the SMART bench, and that's just a very basic workbench. Now the SMART station that integrates all the other tools, it's effectively the same bench with the modification for the miter box to integrate. that being said, I was curious, hey, if I'm making templates, are these templates going to work for the total station or for the smart station? So I did two things. One, I went ahead and pulled up the build video. He has like a 46-minute build the smart station video. So I checked that. I watched into, I don't know, the first 5 or 10 minutes, because that is where he is using his patterns in order to, you know, to make things. In his build video for the smart bench, he starts out by making the patterns. You know, because I think it was his older video, and so it's from scratch. So he makes the patterns, and that was very, very valuable to watch that. Well, in this video for the total station, for the smart station, he actually simply uses those patterns over again, and he just indicates when those patterns, you have to kind of slide them over, you can't use them exactly that way. I was concerned that, is it possible that I could modify today to make a pattern that is more versatile, that will work tomorrow for the smart bench, and will work later without having to remake it for the total station, for the smart station? And it looks like you don't really have to change anything. I'm going to build this in metric. I have an all metric tape, and I'm going to build this in metric because metric is actually more precise, because honestly you get more tick marks on your tape measure for every quote-unquote inch than you do actually on a regular tape measure. So I'm going to do this in all metric. The plans, he has them in metric. I'm going to do all metric. I'm okay with the metric system. I can work with it. It's not any harder than the fractional system. And if you have a tape measure, you just read the numbers. Well, it's a matter of feeding the fire and then figuring out what pattern I want to start creating first. So, one thing to note is that Ron's plans come in both imperial and in metric. So if you're strictly imperial, they'll work just fine. But they're all in metric as well, or they're not all, but they have metric as well, and I prefer the metric now. In his plans currently, he also has a pattern page. So I am taking all of this from his pattern page, and in that pattern page it actually shows on a laid out piece of plywood where you could make your cuts to maximize the use of the plywood, so you don't have to figure out your cuts and, you know, and then goof something up to where you have to go get a second sheet because something is now too short and you needed it longer. Here, of course, you can see in the picture-in-picture that I am laying out the sawhorses, and it is a busy diagram to create, but it's not complicated. And of course you see up close here that I am actually doing the cuts with my track saw wherever there's a straight cut, and then I'll do the relief cuts and clean it up with a jigsaw. So really good stuff. I try not to overcut my patterns just because I want to have a pattern that looks pretty good when I'm done. So that's why I'm being very careful here to make sure that I'm not overcutting anything, even though some small overcut would not hurt the pattern at all. The way routers work with the pattern bushing. Okay, so I've done all of the cuts that I can with the track saw on the template for the sawhorses. Now it's grabbing a jigsaw, cleaning it up. Then I have to do a little bit of detail work on the inside, and I believe this is good to go. This was, I believe, the most complicated of the jigs that you have to, or the patterns that you have to create, just because of the fact you've got a lot of things going on. Not hard, just busy, and good marks to make sure that you don't accidentally cut through one of your material supports or something that needs to stay on the yeah, I mean, you can fix it, but if it needs to stay as part of this, you don't want to cut it off. The Paulk SMART bench that I'm working on currently, when I was making the patterns for that one, I actually did that with my sawhorse pattern, that I cut through something I was not supposed to cut through. So I had to do some repair work. I didn't have to remake the jig at all, but I did have some repair work to do. So I was very conscious of that with this pattern to make sure that I did not goof it up. I have two of these jigsaws, these barrel-handled jigsaws. They're identical models. The first jigsaw I bought, I actually set up with a Collins coping foot in order to do trim, to do coping for trim. And that's exactly why I bought this jigsaw and why I permanently mounted the Collins coping foot to it. I say permanently, you should be able to swap them out, but it's not inconsequential to actually take one of the shoes off and then replace it. So it would be tough to put it back. When I was working on a cruise sometime later and they would go to grab a jigsaw out of my trailer, they'd grab the only one I had. They had the Collins coping foot. And they were complaining, bunch of whiners. Just, it was hard to use, granted, but man. So I went ahead and bought a second jigsaw and just left the flat shoe on it. And honestly, I'm very happy that I did that. It's nice to have both. It's a luxury, but it's nice to have both. I'm also a big fan of what Ron Paulk has really kind of driven home to me, in that as you make your patterns and as you make your pieces eventually with these patterns, to go ahead and finish the piece to as much as you can before you move on to the next piece. So in this case, I'm rounding it over because I hadn't bought a chamfer bit yet, so I'm rounding all the patterns over. I may sand it. And it's just nice when you're done with the pattern and you set it off to the side that you know you're actually done with the pattern. So I do appreciate that. Here I am actually making a pattern that will eventually allow me to lay out for the holes that index for the hinges. And also he is integrated, and right here I'm drilling for it, he is integrated where you have the handle in the middle of the bench, and this would be the cutout for the handle itself. So I'm just connecting the dots, and then I will go ahead and jigsaw it out, and then I'll clean it up and probably round it all over. Here I am making the pattern that will allow me to make the spreader shelf, which will perfectly space the sawhorses when you're setting up, in order for the bench to just sit down on the sawhorses and immediately index on the hinges, which will be proud of the top of the sawhorse. And it kind of locks it all in, just aligns it up. And this is the pattern that Ron, I believe he said he had something like 50 hours into trying to figure this entire pattern out with the spacing and everything else. And I can believe it. To make a pattern that would work every time someone made a bench, I can understand why you would have a lot of time and effort into this. I appreciate and will use the shelf, even though I will also have it on one of those smart carts, which will index the sawhorses anyway. But I like the shelf. I like the stability of the shelf, and I like the shelf itself for putting things on. So here again, I'm just finishing the piece off, rounding it over, and I just like the patterns to feel good when you pick them up, feel finished, as well as, of course, the actual parts that you make out of these router patterns. Here I am actually doing the round over for patterns that will be used on the Smart Station. Since I had the plywood out and I had the plans, and picked out the patterns that were unique to that particular bench and went ahead and made them since I had everything out and I was going. So I'm very happy that I did this, and when it comes time in the next couple, 3 weeks to start the Smart Station, basically these are the sawhorse extensions for the material holders for the miter saw. So that's really nice that I was able to do that. Okay, so here I am with the master pattern. He calls it originally the pattern, but eventually he changes the name to the master pattern. So I am using the master pattern to make a pattern. And this pattern is going to be the spreader pattern, which forms the 2 ends and the 2 inside spreaders. I did make a mistake here in that I mixed up my spacing, and so I'm going to have to slide the master pattern over a little bit and just take a little bit more out, but that was completely my mistake. From this pattern that I am making, then I can make all 4 spreader pieces. Here again I am using the master pattern, and I'm going to make a second pattern. This pattern is for the sides, of which I will need 2 sides. The side pattern is actually different on the Smart Bench than it is on the Smart Station. The Smart Station in the center has a wider opening. The Smart Bench actually has 3 identical openings that are evenly spaced. Had I thought differently, I would have made the Smart Station side pattern with the wider central opening, then just use that for the Smart Bench. There's no reason for it not to be used on the Smart Bench. Both benches would have been identical, and I actually would have only had to have made this one pattern for the sides, and it would have served both benches. Here we go. So finally, at the end of the day, here are all the patterns, to include 3 patterns that I made for the Smart Station that'll come up in some time to come. So in the center you see the master pattern, and from that I created the spreader and the side pattern, and then there I am laying out the Smart Station patterns as well.